economic growth and increase social equity in an environment that allows the world to thrive. This was said by the Ban Ki-moon earlier. He was the Secretary General of the United Nations. Now, the challenges for the sustainable energy for all are nearly 1 in 5 on the planet lacks access to electricity as per the World Bank data, and 12% of the world population does not have access to electricity, and for India it was around 16% up to last year, and almost 2.8 billion, that means 280 crore people rely on the wood, coal, charcoal or animal waste like dung cake for cooking and heating world over. And this is a major barrier to eradicate poverty and building shared prosperity. What are the climate issues? Where the energy services are available in plenty, the problem is waste and pollution. Anthropogenic emissions are contributing to climate change, we all know, and this has impact on the lives, communities, infrastructure, distributions and budgets, and climate change impacts the poor first. Now, limiting climate change will require sustained and substantial reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions have continued to increase over 1970 to 2010. Today we are in 2024, and this is the highest in the human history from 2000 to 2010. And CO2 emissions from fossil fuel combustion and industrial processes contributed about 78% of the total greenhouse gas emissions increase from between 1970 to 2010. About half of the cumulative anthropogenic CO2 emissions between 1750 and 2010 have occurred in the last 40 years. And in baseline scenario, direct CO2 emissions from the energy supply sector are projected to triple by 2050 as compared to 2010, and unless energy intensity improvements are accelerated. Now, the climate change impacts mitigation and adaptations, the difference between the natural climate variability we will discuss and anthropogenic climate change, monitored changes in India's key climate parameters and India's energy policies and their greenhouse gas emission effects, and India's response to natural variability in climate change. Now, you see these CO2 emissions, the concerns of the CO2 emissions. When industrial revolution was started, can anybody tell? Industrial revolution. When Carnot engine was invented, 1850 around. When heat engines were invented, steam engines were invented, 1850. That time, I think the energy we were using like forest-based, agriculture-based. We were burning coal in our angitis or Indian chulas, let's say, or domestic chulas. And after 1850, the industrial revolution started. So, how many years now the industrial revolution started? Almost more than 250 years. 250 plus 24 more than 275 years. And in these 75 years, we were taking the world from 1850. The concentration of CO2 emission in 1850 in the atmosphere was 360 part per million. In 1990, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere was around 360 part per million, and in 1850 it was 280 part per million. 1990, 360 part per million, today it has become 420 part per million. So CO2 emissions see around 30% are increased from 280 part per million to today. Now, I ask a question, what is the average temperature of the earth? Can anybody tell what is the average temperature of the earth? Today temperature in Delhi may be around 40 degrees Celsius. But temperature on the average may be minus 30, minus 40 in June. In winter it may be minus 80, minus 70 on the average. In Arctic, Antarctic it may be minus 30, minus 40. Depending on the in southern hemisphere and northern hemisphere. But the average temperature of the earth is today is 15 degrees Celsius. If you see average, पूरा दुनिया का temperature है आपने लिया, and you measure if the average will come 15 degrees Celsius, that means the nature God has given the earth to us almost fully air conditioned. ये मत देखो कि दिल्ली में temperature 40 है, दिल्ली में 40 है, आर्टिक अंटार्कटिक पर हिमालय में temperature काफी माइनस में. So average temperature is 15 degrees Celsius. In 1850, 275 years ago, the average temperature of the earth was 14 degrees Celsius. that means there is an increase of 1 degree Celsius temperature in the last 275 years. And if this trend continues, that means we will breach the Paris Agreement, in which we have to limit the temperature of the earth by 1.5 degrees Celsius. So if that climate change is not controlled, what will happen in the end of this 21st century? The temperature of the Delhi, ambient temperature, air temperature in Delhi in the month of June may go up to 50 degrees Celsius or 55 degrees Celsius. That means you cannot go out from your room, from your air conditioner outside. There will be a lot of heat waves, heat strokes. So that will impact the earth as a whole. Now the likely impacts of climate change. What are the likely impacts of climate change? You see, health. You can see this health, and on this parameter, weather-related mortality. If temperature will rise, many cases of heat stroke, heat waves will increase, and people may die. Agriculture, crop yields, irrigation demands will increase. Crop yields will decrease. See, for the wheat, if winter temperature increases, अगर सर्दियाँ नहीं होंगी northern hemisphere, what will happen? For wheat, for milking of the wheat grain, you require particular temperature of 40 days from December to January. If that particular temperature is not attained, अगर बहुत ज़्यादा winter नहीं हुई, तो what will happen? The grain, basically the size of the grain will reduce. That means overall productivity of wheat will reduce in the northern hemisphere, in India also, and that is question for the food security. So crop yield will decrease and irrigation demand. When temperature will increase, the demand for water for irrigation will also increase. The forest composition will decrease. Basically forest health and productivity of forest will decrease. You are seeing, I think Uttarakhand, you said this, there is a lot of forest fires. So number of forest fire incidents will also increase over time because of the climate change. Now there is water resources, the demand for water will increase, the supply of the water will decrease, and there is coastal areas. In India, basically the climate change impact, I think, will be much more for Indian subcontinent. Why? We are having more than 7,000 kilometers of the coastal area from Kolkata to पूरा India का चक्कर लगा के आप सूरत तक. In 7,000 kilometers of coastal area. So in this coastal area, what will happen? Tropical cyclones, frequent tropical cyclones will come, and you have to shift the population. If there is sea level rise, lot of agricultural land will become unfit for farmers. So productivity will decrease. Now species and natural areas, loss of habitat for the species. Many species will extinct. They will not survive in climate change. You see the variation of all India surface air temperature. You see the mean temperature is increasing. You can see this is increasing over time, and maximum temperature is also increasing over time, and minimum temperature is also increasing. If you see the 200, 300 years history, and you see the diurnal temperature day or night is also increasing in India. Now, the glacier melt in the Himalaya is projected to increase flooding, rock avalanches from these slopes, and this will affect the water resources within the next 2 or 3 decades. This will decrease river flows. If you see the Ganga river, now scientists say if this trend continues, the glacier, Gangotri glacier, I think some of you must have seen the Gangotri glacier. The Gangotri glacier is sinking. Ganga is an perennial river. They flow. After monsoon, they flow with the ice melt. So the glacier are sinking, that means the water availability Ganga river will decrease. And the water availability Ganga river will decrease. That means you can see in the Indo-Gangetic plain, 50% of the Indian population is around, depends on the this Indo-Gangetic plain, of the Indo-Gangetic plain. So water will not be available. Sufficient water will not be available for irrigation, for drinking. Many cities, including Delhi, Kanpur, Delhi, Allahabad, Banaras, Kolkata, all this, Patna. So 50% of the population. So this population, why the population population is there in India, in the North India, because these rivers will support. These rivers support irrigation. These rivers support agriculture, and these rivers support human population. So if the water availability in these rivers in the coming years, coming decades decrease, then it will lead lot of problems for the Indian population to survive. So fresh water availability will also decrease. Now, you see, climate change is projected to impinge on the sustainable development of most developing countries of Asia, as it compounds the pressure on natural resources and the environment associated with rapid industrialization and economic development. And it is projected that crop yields could decrease up to 20%. Wheat crop can also decrease yield of the wheat crop 20% in East and Southeast Asia, while it could decrease up to 30% in the Central and South Asia by 2050. And there will be endemic morbidity and mortality because of the many diseases primarily associated with floods and droughts are expected to rise in East, South and Southeast Asia, including India. And some adaptation is occurring now to observed and projected future climate change, and adaptation will be necessary to decrease to address the impacts resulting from the warming which is already occurring and which is unavoidable due to the past emissions we have done. A wide area of adaptation options is available, but more extensive adaptation is currently occurring, is required to reduce the vulnerability to climate change. And there are various limits and costs, but these are not fully understood, and vulnerability to climate change can be exacerbated by the presence of other stresses with climate change. So climate change impacts will vary regionally, but they are very likely to impose net annual costs which will increase over time as global temperature will increase. Therefore, systematic observation and research is required in days to come. Now there are sustainability challenges. Until we experience a prolonged power cut, prolonged power shortage, most of us take the availability of electricity for granted and do not think how much we depend on the energy. And most of the world's energy comes from the fossil fuels, from coal, gas and petroleum. The next most common source of energy is hydropower. While it is considered clean, but there are limitations for the hydropower because we have seen the Kedarnath disaster, other disasters. So there is a hydropower energy basically is not promoted nowadays. And the freshwater resources are being consumed by the agriculture, industry and the domestic use, but more than 1 billion people still lack access to the clean water. And the demand for the new fuel and raw material resulting from the deforestation and degradation of the semi-arid land is resulting in the expansion of desert, and it becomes unusable for agriculture. Expansion of desert, you see the Thar desert is also increasing. The expansion of desert is occurring in Thar desert also because of the variability in rainfall, because of less rainfall during the monsoon season. So the climate changes basically kills an estimated of 30,000 people per year, mostly in the developing world. This is reported in the Global Humanitarian Forum 2019, and the majority of these deaths are attributed to crop failure leading to malnutrition and hydrometeorological disasters like floods, cyclones and droughts. And these hydrometeorological disasters we have already seen. We have seen the Kedarnath disaster. We have seen the problem of flooding in Chennai, in Bangalore, and we have already seen in Dubai. Dubai basically is a blue-white city. I think in northern hemisphere, everyone wants to visit Dubai. What is happening in Dubai? Camels are floating in water. I think the second time rain. It is not expected. That so much of rain will be in Dubai. 247 millimeter rain in 24 hours in Dubai, and yearly average around 170 millimeter. So the basically year rain occurred within 24 hours or 48 hours in Dubai, and it is very difficult to evacuate that water. So such kinds of these are known as the hydrometeorological disasters like flood and cyclone. They will increase because of the climate change. Now, if you see this slide, you see the emissions of CO2. You can see the 1850 can see here, this, 1,000 years ago, almost, this like 1600 century, 1800 century, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere was 280 part per million. 280 part per million, you see this. This was not changed. But after Industrial Revolution, which occurred in 1850 with the invent of Carnot engine, with the invent of steam engine, when the fossil fuels were used, plenty, and steam engines became the guzzler of the fossil fuels, and the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere increased drastically, exponentially, and now it has reached around 420 part per million now. Similarly, these are the greenhouse gases. Nitrous oxide, it was static for 1,000 years on Earth. The trace gases concentration was constant, and this increased after 1850. This increased drastically, this increased exponentially. Similarly, the concentration of CS4 increased. So I think the characteristic time, you see the time scale on the Earth system, like atmospheric composition, climate system, ecological system, and socio-economic system, with different systems take different times on geological scale. I will not discuss this in detail because it's a little bit more scientific. You see the climate, US cold blast scales 21, and hottest January in Australia. Australia there were a lot of forest fires. Many species, it died in that, for 2 years ago. There were forest fire. Now we are seeing in India also the forest fire with the onset of the summer. Changing climate. Major focus in changing climate is on the global mean temperature. And major focus is also on the rainfall variability. How the rainfall is increasing, decreasing. Some areas is required decreasing. Some areas is increasing too much. Like you see in Dubai, you have already seen. So how will it be distributed spatially and seasonally from place to place and from time to time? And does it come as a more intense? Is it likely to rapidly re-evaporate or not due to the high temperature? And major focus is also on the changing in winter storms or tropical cyclones. Like in India, we are basically a country of tropical cyclones. The temperature of the Arabian Sea is increasing. Earlier we were seeing cyclones only in the Bay of Bengal, but not in the Arabian Sea. But for the last decade, for the last 10 years, we are also seeing the tropical cyclones in Gujarat, on the this Kerala coast, Maharashtra coast we are seeing, because the temperature of the sea, temperature of the Arabian Sea is increasing, and when the temperature of the Arabian Sea is increasing, that means a lot of energy is stored in the Arabian Sea, and that's coming in the form of tropical cyclones. So this will challenge for us also to how to tackle the tropical cyclones, the West Coast. And West Coast, we have the major city, we have the diamond city, Surat in the West Coast. We have the Bombay, the financial capital of India, the West Coast. So the tropical cyclones increases. Then for the management people, you see how much economic losses, how much financial losses, how much money we have to is spent by the insurance company. So this is paper very recently in aerosol black carbon concentration in the emission estimates in mega city. This paper was published by me, my PhD student. Now you can see this effect of extreme temperature. You can see, suppose this is a previous climate and this will be new climate. You can see the